Welcome to Walk with Frank. I'm Frank. Welcome to another podcast series, the PTSD pandemic, the crisis after the crisis. I put together a podcast series reaching out to my followers, keeping people informed, interviewing interesting people, trying to keep people up to date with what I'm doing in my work, trying to keep people up to date with my thoughts and what's going on. During the quarantine with Frank, if you will, part of my podcast series, being quarantined, sometimes I feel like I'm in an underground movement. I feel like, the Anne Frank scenario of broadcasting people. We're in a world now of talking heads. Everyone is broadcasting from their homes and their closets. And I mean, I've seen every scenario. I envision the upbeat of the talking head scenario of everyone are the home decorators, home decor people that are actually analyzing every living room in America. Everybody's house now is out in public, and I could just see the home decorators going, "Do you believe what that looked like?" I expected more from him in the way of decoration. So it's kind of funny that we're in this talking head scenario from our little inner sanctums of the world. I always that said, I always start my podcast series with a commentary on something, usually something that I talked about in a previous podcast. And I talked about funding with Marie, a clinical therapist, in my last podcast, and we talked about funding and moving forward. Before the pandemic, I was asked to do a video to send to Governor Cuomo on cutting the Joseph P. Dwyer project. For those of you that don't know, the Dwyer program, the Dwyer project, is a one-on-one peer support program that one veteran helps another. So theoretically, one veteran that's gone through a more advanced stage of PTSD is now consoling and now counseling a younger veteran that is just beginning the PTSD journey, if you will. And it's a peer support project. This past year, funding was cut in New York State. Joseph P. Dwyer, originally from Long Island, from Mount Sinai, Long Island, was an Iraqi soldier who suffered PTSD, severe PTSD, and brain injury, traumatic brain injury. He was made famous by the photograph of him carrying the child out of combat. And when he came home, he struggled with traumatic brain injury. He struggled with PTSD, and other veterans began consoling him, and thus the Dwyer Project was initiated, and now it's gone statewide. And this past year, funding has been cut for the Dwyer program. So I put together with Assemblyman Mike LiPetri, who is our guest today, and I put together a video to send to Governor Cuomo, and Assemblyman LiPetri asked prominent, if you will, prominent veterans that are well known to please make a video, and we sent the video up to Governor Cuomo. What's the point? The point is funding. What does it look like? What does funding look like moving forward? What does funding look like in New York State, for instance, when we were in a mental health crisis before the pandemic, and now we've lost all funding for mental health, education programs, all the money has been diverted and allocated to fight the pandemic. So moving forward, we're in a worse case scenario financially in New York State. And there's a lot of states that are going through this. And so usually, historically, when we fight in a war, and given the fact we're at war now and we're all soldiers, historically, after every war, we go into this mental health crisis syndrome. whether it be just the soldiers, whether it be the families of the soldiers. We all seem to go through a scenario of readjustment. And in that readjustment period is mental health. And I believe we're headed for a severe mental health crisis. I believe that, we are at that point now that we're going to have to readjust the new norm. What's it look like? 20 million Americans have lost their jobs this month. They're going through a traumatic event. That's just not 20 million people. That's 20 million people with families. So exponentially, we have affected, millions and millions of people with this pandemic financially. The hardships associated with financial stress, the hardships associated, we've lost almost 50,000 Americans. The hardship of losing that, it's just not, I've always said this in war, sometimes it's easier to be the dead person than it is to be the person that has to carry on, because associated with that person that passed away is an entire family that has to pick up the pieces and make sense of it. And now we're in a scenario where they can't even personally say goodbye to their loved ones. So we're going into this mental health crisis, but we're also going into a financial crisis. So what's it look like? We have a higher demand for mental health programs. We have decreased funding. What's that going to look like ahead? My guest today, Assemblyman from the 9th District of New York State, Mike LiPetri, is going to be with us today. He sits on the Committee for Social Services in New York State. Mike is a veteran advocate. He's a social work advocate. I have worked with him numerous times in different veteran projects. He is an energetic elected official. He's well known in Albany. And with that, I'd like to introduce our special guest today, Assemblyman Mike LiPetri. Welcome, Mike, and thank you. I hope you and your family are safe and healthy, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us here on Walpin.
Thank you so much, Frank, for being here. It's a real pleasure. I mean, to be by your side and work with you throughout this time as a state legislator has been a true privilege.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Mike, the last time we were together, we were doing, I wouldn't call it radical, but we were doing a kind of a point of fact video together. And we were talking about funding. We were talking about cutting funding to the Dwyer program, one-on-one. And, in my work, what I do, and I'm out there, I'm in the trenches, I'm talking to veterans all the time. I'm always looking for that next bit of help, let's call it. And we got together and we made a video together and sent it to Governor Cuomo on behalf of all the veterans of New York State. For our listeners that don't know, the Dwyer program is a one-on-one peer support where one veteran helps another. It always baffles my mind why we struggle for funding. Why in this day and age, with so many things going on in the world, so many outreaches for people, so much funding going on, and why we're always on the chopping block. Why is it always that these social services are first on a chopping block, and veterans issues are first on the chopping block? They've been chipping away. I'm 71 years old, and I've been, since 1970, I've been dealing with the VA, and little by little, they've been chopping away at certain things throughout my life, and it continues. And this is just one example. So, what's your thoughts on that? Why is it? Why are we the last? Why does all the money go somewhere else and not to our issues?
It's always shocked me and was one of my biggest frustrations as a state legislator when I saw that happening time and time again. I find it quite sad, to say the least, that our veterans are not at the epicenter and at the forefront of being taken care of. I mean, as you know, part of the Sons of AMVETS Post 88. Our motto is serving those who have served. So I've looked to take that to state government now and making sure we put our veterans as number one. I don't know, I can't ever specify why exactly each legislator doesn't care to put our veterans to the front, or those who prioritize others over our veterans is even more, frankly, disconcerting. Uh, so what I think it is, though, is it comes down to a day of politics, or the age of politics, where the media has such a 24/7 cycle that veterans are not always in the limelight as the political talking point, which is a problem in of itself, which is what I've been trying to change frequently, frankly, as a state legislator. But also, I think that's why it's more incumbent upon every law-abiding American to be there to keep pushing and advancing issues that affect our veterans, so that they still are as a talking point, or a heavy talking point for media to keep pushing forward. And so people keep hearing about veterans issues as opposed to it being cast in the shadows.
I, being going through the veteran process for over 50 years now, I was in Vietnam in 68, and I went into the service 68 through 70. And going through that process that, we've been going through, it's what I call, we were going through a veteran-friendly era in American history. So we had the Vietnam veteran, of course, being shunned by society, left to our own devices, pretty much spat on throughout history. But then there came a time, there was a turnaround, and the United States, if not the world, became more veteran-friendly. And I think that's due to the Vietnam veteran of what we went through. So the veterans have become in the limelight, so to speak. Now, today, we're kind of focused on everything is either disease or politics right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're still at war. Obviously, we still have an army out there somewhere in the world fighting. And, I haven't heard one iota of anything going on. Where is our military right now? And, not talking about, the comfort or the ship that's come into New York and Los Angeles, but we have an entire army out there. We're still at war, and you really hear very, very little about the veteran anymore. And so, are we going to forget the veteran again after this pandemic, like we did after Vietnam?
Well, I sure hope not. That's some of my biggest concerns in mixed messaging, frankly, is where you have, you're speaking about COVID-19 now, but what's going on with our military men and women? Uh, how are they holding up during this time, during this pandemic? Are they okay? What's going on with their health? Do we need assistance to our military men and women? Do they need the assistance? And are they getting the appropriate health support while they're serving, while they're protecting our nation, both domestic and abroad? So, I mean, those are real questions that need to be made now, and those are comments that need to be said in the public limelight. Now, it's important, too, to really pressure our media to also put that in the limelight. Many times, often enough, I'll speak about a variety of different issues, and they won't get picked up at all. They won't get picked up from papers. They won't get picked up from television networks, because their choices determine who comes on to their networks to speak on topics that they deem okay. And that's the frustrating part. And that's why I think it's so important in this day and age to focus on alternative measures of where you can really speak out on the issues, such as podcasts, such as social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, pushing out those messages so that people hear what's not being broadcasted on television, because of others who are filtering out, frankly, who comes on to their networks and says what they decide on their networks.
I agreed. I understand that concept, that point, that we have to keep pushing, and that's always
Mm-hmm.
been the walk with Frank, is moving forward, always moving forward. I want to paint a picture for our audience. So, going back to 2019, I walked across New York State. I've been advocating and teaching PTSD classes for 30 years, as you know.
Yeah.
I had education curriculum 30 years ago before people heard the term PTSD, right?
Yep.
And I've been doing this for a long time. To get more attention, I walked across New York State. I brought together the state at a veteran level. Then it became actually a mental health issue. I brought in other mental health. I spoke at regionally at the VA benefits department, both in Buffalo and New York City. So I had this going for me. People are finally paying attention to me. The old man's walking across New York State, so to speak. So what's going on? I'm going into the fall of 2019. I'm working with Senator Brooks for the Veterans Affairs Committee, chairperson for Veterans Affairs. I'm working with Senator Mayer, chairperson for Education. I have funding in place to take my education, my PTSD education programs across New York State. It's in place. Everything's in place. You come to my showcase curriculum, right? The curriculum showcase in Bay Shore. We host elected officials. Senator Boyle was there. There were a host of other elected officials that stopped in, coming and going. So we go into the holidays, we take a break. We come out of the holidays, bam. Everything it's a new world after the holidays. It's a new world. I lost all my funding this past year. I had funding in place to take PTSD education, something I've worked for 30 years of my life, across New York State to every school district in New York State. Bam, you must have been, your head must have been spinning when you got back to Albany after the break. I mean, tell us about it. You know, what was going on?
Yeah, this is the frustrations that I'm seeing in New York State in terms of specific the legislature now having a change in who they prioritize, and that's the frustrations we saw with the Joseph P. Dwyer. When I asked you to attend that rally, that press conference, to put pressure on the governor to have those millions of dollars in funding restored to yours as well, that funding to PTSD. It's people truly, I mean, I think it's government officials that just don't understand how important it is to be there to support our veterans. And it's astonishing when you're in the state legislature and you're seeing the bills that they're trying to push forward, that they're trying to advance. And when I say they, I mean, it comes down to New York State is a Democratic state now. It's become where both the Assembly and the Senate and the governor are all one house, one party rule. And, you know, it's not about what should be is with veterans. It should never come down to partisanship. It should never be Democrat, Republican. It needs to be a focus of values, but I've seen those values change more and more as you've seen a shift in political ideology among Democrats. And that's one of my frustrations, is that it's become more of a socialistic ideology rather than focusing on that middle ground common sense approach that helps our veterans and law-abiding Americans. That's what I want to see, and that's what you've advocated for. Your PTSD. And remember, you've had legislators, like you said, Senator Mayer, Senator Brooks. They are both two Democrat officials, too, that have worked with you to try to push because they care about veterans. And so I'm not shunning them. I want to focus on more of that, how once you step into the Capitol in the legislature, now you're dealing with 63 state senators. You're dealing with 150 assemblymen and the governor, who now have all different priorities. But frankly, my point needs to be is that number one should always be our veterans. So how do we help with PTSD? How do we help with peer-to-peer mental health counseling? How do we help keeping our veterans from being homeless? How do we help giving them proper healthcare services and healthcare delivery? That's what you have to be focusing on, and that's what always should be at the forefront, where we're helping our veterans day in and day out on those legislative issues. So that's why I really want to impress upon to your audience specifically is reaching out and communicating to our state officials, our federal officials, letting them know that these are issues that are still happening. These are issues that need to be addressed, and these are issues that must be helped. And these issues must be put as number one priority so that the veterans get the funding they need to ultimately assist with their living and assist with their lifestyle as they now become citizens or back to civilians in New York State and all across this country.
So you sit on a social services committee, am I correct?
That's correct.
So beyond the veteran, I call my podcast series the the PTSD pandemic, the
Hmm.
crisis after crisis. I believe we're going into a mental health crisis beyond the veteran. I believe that uh, given the concept we're at war and we're all soldiers pressed into service, this this situation, this unprecedented times that we're in, we're all feeling it. We're talking heads now. I feel like I'm in an underground movement here. I'm broadcasting from my home. You're broadcasting from your home. Letting the world know we're still alive. We're still working towards whatever it is our agenda is, whatever our scenario is. You know, um, with that, 20 million Americans have lost their job this past month. So, and I also believe we're going into a financial crisis, whether it be a recession, hope not depression. We're going into that scenario. So we have a pandemic, a disease pandemic. We have a mental health pandemic. Now we have a financial pandemic. Okay, so moving forward, historically, on the chopping block, when we have no money, historically, social services are the first to get cut, are the first on the chopping block, are the first historically. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the future, but historically, that's what's happened in America. The veterans benefits get cut. The Dwyer program gets cut. Okay. On the social services committee, well, is funding going to be my problem and the other healthcare providers that I've been interviewing lately? Moving forward, are we going to be out of funds? What's it look like next year?
Yeah, that's where we're completely unknown what's going to be, what next year is going to look like. I mean, this is unprecedented territory. We have a global pandemic. Our economy has been shut down in specifically New York State and other states, and nationally as well. You have uh, shelter in place with other countries that's happening. You're having mental health problems come to really a tipping point, frankly. With this last $2 trillion stimulus package on the federal level, they had approximately $500 million allocated to mental health and substance abuse services. That's just showing, and that indicates how much of an issue it's going to be to help those who are suffering from mental health issues, anxiety, depression, etc. And I think it's really incumbent upon us as legislators now going forward, both on this federal and state level, to really focus on helping those who need the mental health assistance and not sweeping it under the rug. Back in history has shown that those who have suffered from mental health issues uh, did not get proper treatment. That was swept under the rug, that was taboo in society. No one wanted to talk about it. That cannot be the case today. That's something that needs to come. That's why it's so great with what you're doing, where you are speaking about PTSD, helping veterans. I mean, I always impress upon, as I always do in my post, in AMVETS Post 88, we always talk about how 22 lives, people 22/7, you know about that, Frank, right? 22 veterans commit suicide every day. That's a real number. And that's only going to be aggravated as this pandemic continues to go on and as we are not allowed to live our lives as we should. We're being out, speaking to people, talking to the public, just walking through the park, being with your kids and your grandchildren, walking your dog. That's necessary to living a healthy lifestyle so that we as a community can actually interact, engage, and then also we can be able to communicate, not just virtually, but also in person, so that people can talk about their feelings, talk about their mental health, and talk about what's bothering them so that they can get it, so that they could heal from it and ultimately move on and live a prosperous and beneficial life.
When I decided to walk across 3 years ago, when I decided to set up the Walk with Frank project, I had done several projects throughout my years, 30 years. The Art of War project is 30 years old now, where I bring PTSD artwork into school districts. I've been
It's
doing that.
incredible.
Yeah, and in lecturing before people didn't even know the term.
Right.
10 years ago, I traveled back to Southeast Asia and I lived in the jungles and rice paddies all over again as an old man. And I had a daily podcast going from there. And I created a learning curriculum. So students in America actually followed me, and I Skyped with students from the jungles of Southeast Asia, literally from grass huts and rice paddies, right into the classrooms of America as a real learning experience in a former military theater, in a former war theater. Now I have, 3 years ago, I predicted that we're going to kind of get into a mental health crisis. I saw it kind of developing and coming to fruition. And so I created the Walk with Frank, Walk Across New York State podcast, walking series, where students actually followed me. I introduced New York State students to homeless veterans. I slept in homeless shelters. I introduced them to our elected officials. I introduced them to veterans all over New York State, state troopers, and gave them a concept of who we are as veterans. It turned into, it took on a life of its own, really, because we got into mental health and people were reaching out to me. But yet the student was following me at all times. My programs, my curriculum, the new curriculum that was going statewide before the pandemic, the experience of the American soldier. How important moving forward do you think PTSD education programs like mine are going to be moving forward?
Incredibly important. I mean, what you just highlighted was exactly what I think the future generations need to witness themselves, to see firsthand what the life of the American soldier really is and what they go through on a daily basis or what they've experienced throughout these wars. I think that's so important because it brings a human concept to these different experiences that America has gone through throughout its lifetime. And that's what I loved about your program, because it goes deeper than simply World War II, Vietnam, these more macro concepts. You're bringing it down to a one-on-one human engagement where people see that human touch of the emotional impact, the mental impact, the physical impact, and the how the toll it takes on the human body, the human mind. That's what your program brings, and that's what I really think is incumbent. So people can, because understanding the sacrifices our military, our veterans have made, makes it more of a priority to our society at large, where they see, look what they've done for us. Look what they've done. Look at the sacrifices they've made to keep us safe, to keep this nation whole. Isn't it important that we as a government, as a civilized society, now return that sacrifice back to them and provide them these services, provide them these benefits, so that they know they're not alone? And that's what I think your program does. It provides that heart-to-heart connection, so that when our state leaders are voting on bills, are pushing forward funding, they remember that because they learned it firsthand when they were in school because of programs like yourself. That's what I want to see happen as we go forward in these next upcoming 5, 10, 15 years in the future.
People ask me what I do on lockdown in quarantine. Well, I do this. I make podcasts. I reach out to people. I continue with my work. But one other thing I do is I scour the world, literally, for primary source documents. And
So awesome.
just on during quarantine alone, I've purchased hundreds of military letters, right? Personal letters that have gone on the auction block. So I bid for these things and collected, among other things. I've come across Viet Cong artwork, for instance. I bought 6 pieces of Viet Cong artwork, liberation artwork done by the enemy. That's going to go play and put it up against the American artwork, and see you and I personally talked about there's a person at the other side.
Yeah, I love that.
That we don't think about. There's a real person that's shooting at me and I'm shooting at him, and he is creating PTSD artwork on his own. So I've collected that. But these letters, my program with these letters, each student that goes through my program gets an actual, I have enough letters now in my collection to give each student an actual personal letter from a real letter in their hand, living history in their hand, that they could actually read and study. You have to see their eyes light up. They just can't believe they're holding a piece of American history in their hands. And so I find the common theme throughout all these letters that I have in my collection, mental health through all of them. I don't think I could do this. I'm struggling. And there's that common thread. And now taking that common thread one step further with the concept, we're all soldiers now pressed into service in this new war. I believe the American people, for the first time, can get a handle on what it's like for a country to mobilize its resources towards a common enemy. I think the American people maybe just can get an idea of what it's like to be in battle, because we're in battle now, and the front line is Main Street, USA. And so, how do you feel? I mean, what's your concept on that? Do you take that thread now? Are we all going to have PTSD? Are we all going to have residuals from this event that these unprecedented times that we're living through?
I wouldn't say we. I think that when you said about the society, about us as a country mobilizing our resources towards a common enemy, I think now it's important to recognize that we should mobilize our resources towards our allies, our people, right? Each and every one of us care about America. Each and every one of us care about our neighbors, our friends, our families. And I think it's important now at this time that those who need the assistance, this treatment, we have to mobilize our resources towards them. I hope not that it's 100% PTSD all across this nation, but you never know. And the goal is to limit it and minimize it and get as close to zero as possible. So if that means we have to focus and put our resources targeted towards mental health and substance abuse treatment, then so be it. We will, because that's what we need ultimately to make sure that our people are taken care of, so that they don't end up in a situation where they harm themselves, or God forbid, is that their life is taken.
In two of my previous podcasts before this one, I interviewed an Iraqi combat medic who was at one time homeless. He suffers PTSD, and he was an alcoholic, and he's fighting all these different levels of trauma in his life. He's now working in an ICU unit on the front lines in Rochester, New York, at a major hospital. And so I interviewed him. It was amazing to get his concept on, wow, look at where we are now. Look where I am now. But in his veteran home, he still lives in a veteran home. After work, he goes. It's a veteran facility. His next roommate committed suicide during the pandemic. Another therapist, Marie, she works with at-risk society. The lockdown, what does it look like in lockdown PTSD? Lockdown domestic violence. We're locking down child abuse and domestic violence and uncomfortable situations. We're asking them to stay home. One of her clients committed suicide. So it looks like it's affecting a lot of people, not just the veteran. It looks like it to me, and it looks like it's going to be more widespread than we're anticipating. I'm kind of Chicken Little. I'm saying, look, we need to prepare ourselves. My concept has always been, we put up a stop sign after the person gets hit by the car type of scenario. We need to prepare. How moving forward? What does it look like to prepare for mental health? You're on the social services.
Yeah, that's some of the proactiveness is what I've been advocating for from the get-go as a state legislator. And one of my biggest concerns with this lockdown, these quarantines that we're seeing in place from specifically New York State government, I've been speaking with the governor's office every day, and one of my biggest concerns has been exactly what you've just illustrated, is those situations where people are in homes that isn't exactly the best situation for them. And they need to get out, and they need to be able to live their lives outside of these four walls, because what happens is puts them in a corner where ultimately they feel that the only way out is through taking their own lives, and that just can't happen. What it comes down to is balancing financially the correct way, and that means fiscal responsibility and management. What I mean by that is where you have to prepare for these type of pandemics to occur, these type of emergency measures that may take place. You have to prepare financially by having sufficient amounts of rainy day funds, reserves, by also providing alternatives to people that are in these dire situations where they can be, or they could have other areas that they can flock to. So it comes down to taking proper precautionary measures in advance, but that requires forward thinking. And not a lot of people in government, as you just indicated, have forward thinking. They have reactionary thinking. We can't have that. We need more of an investment mindset into our communities, not a spending mindset. We need a different type of mindset focusing on our future generations, what's going to happen in 2030, not what's happening in 2020. This is what I've indicated to the governor's office. I did not like the fact that he's been governor since 2010, and we didn't have proper measures in place before we shut down with what's happening with unemployment insurance, what's happening with small businesses, how are they going to keep afloat? Those are the type of discussions you need to have years ago, anticipating this types of measures to take place. It may have happened now, it may have happened 5 years in the future, but regardless, it was happened years ago, these discussions, so we were ready for it. And it goes back again to proper financial budgeting, so that okay, if this occurs, we have X amount of dollars in place, it'll go towards A, B, and C. And then in certain circumstances where people need to be, if they do have to be at their homes, they could be released in certain times and allowed to explore or get out of their homes so they can have their mental health, keep their mental health in check. So there's no specific exact answers, but it comes down to more of a visionary concept to take more of a proper precautionary steps in order to avoid the dire circumstances and mental health effects we're seeing today.
The visionary concept moving forward when you're lacking funds is even more difficult. You're up against it. I believe you're up against it coming next year. New York was in a budget crisis before the pandemic. Now we've taken all the funds, and for the first time, I've lost my funding, and I don't feel that bad about it because I know it went to save lives. That concept is okay with me. I'd rather lose my funding for mental health to that than to, buy more bullets and guns and planes. Okay, so I'm okay with that. So you being a visionary, me being a visionary, moving forward, how hard is it going to be to pick up the pieces financially to be able for us in New York State to handle this? Is my state, my property taxes going to go up to compensate for this? I mean, I think we're in some dire straits.
Yeah, we're in serious financial dilemma. We already had significant problems financially throughout this state. Even before this occurred, we were in billions of dollars. We had billions of dollars in deficit occurring. We approximately 10 billion it was, and now we're looking at something significantly higher after this pandemic. And that's again because of proper financial management. It's because of you're seeing billions of dollars be spent in certain areas that shouldn't be during, especially this time period that still is happening. But again, these are issues that I bring to the light, but aren't being recognized by various media sources because it doesn't even conform with the narrative, or it's not something that maybe the different media outlets want to pick up, which is some of my frustrations. I mean, you have to call like it is. I mean, when you see difficulties, you can't keep giving billions of dollars in added raises or bonuses or not bonuses, but raises towards government workers, right? That just right now can't happen. You have to focus on more of how we're going to help the law-abiding American and those in need current situation. So if that means we have to hold off money now, we could pay that later on when we have better financial handling. But right now, if we need those billions of dollars to allocate towards COVID treatment, towards helping essential workers, towards providing sufficient PPE, towards those on the front lines, then so be it. But this is where I go into, again, how we have misunderstandings of how we're spending our taxpayer dollars. For me, as a state assemblyman, there's no way I'm ever going to say we're going to increase taxes because it's just too much as it is. And on the flip side, I'm also running for Congress where I want to be an advocate on the federal level so that we make sure that we have the proper money coming back to New York State so they can allocate it towards our residents, towards our New York citizens.
So you are represent the 9th District in New York State in the Assembly. In Central, for our viewers, to give them an idea of where we are. We're in the same district. We're in Central South Shore of Long Island, in the Central Long Island on the South Shore, and representing the 9th District in the Assembly.
Correct.
You are now running for the 2nd District in the U.S. Congress.
Correct.
Also my district, from where I am. Moving forward for you, I mean, you're a fighter. You invite me to all your veteran projects. We've worked together multiple times for veteran outreach programs through the American Legions and the VFWs and put together. How effective is your moving from your concepts in the state going towards the federal government?
Incredibly effective. That's exactly the reason why I am running for Congress, is to give veterans a greater voice, to give the people a greater voice. And what I've been able to accomplish as a state assemblyman will only be peanuts to what I'll be able to do now as a congressman. Because, as an assemblyman, we've held veterans forums. We've gotten free college tuition to Gold Star families. We have gotten funding, millions of dollars allocated to the peer-to-peer mental health counseling programs. We fought for that. We've gotten a permanent director appointed to the New York State Division of Veterans Affairs. We've done all that because of our advocacy, working together, united with myself alongside veterans and the public. Now, as a congressman, now I'll be able to work on providing study for liver fluke disease for Vietnam veterans, focusing on healthcare delivery with the VA, making sure we're having monies allocated to Nassau and Suffolk County on Long Island, where specifically in Suffolk County, which has the largest population of veterans in New York State and one of the largest populations per county of veterans throughout the entire country. So that's what makes sense for me. This is where I come from. I have family that served both in World War II and Korean War. So I've seen, as I said, firsthand the sacrifice that need to be made. And it's only going to be even bigger of what I'll be able to accomplish on behalf of veterans, to have a bigger representative voice on behalf of South Shore of Long Island and veterans nationwide.
What are we looking at for Mike LiPetri moving forward?
Oh, well, it's a tough time right now for everybody. Yes, we can manage. We adapt in terms of technology with our ability to communicate virtually, but nevertheless, nothing can replace the human connection of being in person, speaking with somebody, having that human touch. So although right now we're managing, it's still tough. Again, for you and I, this is who we are. I love working with people. I love representing the people. You love working with people and being their voice, being an advocate for veteran issues. And I think once we get through this and get past this pandemic, we will go back to how we've interacted. And frankly, many people will be yearning for it much greater than ever before because of the absence of it. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's the same situation here, where once we get back to it, where people can go back out, see their loved ones, see their friends, see their family, you're going to see people connecting at in a much more intimate way than ever before, I think.
Mike, thank you so much. I look forward to the day you and I can share another hug and shake hands and be together on a project, working together. I'm always available. My line is open to you anytime. Thank you so much for being with us. New York State Assemblyman Michael LiPetri from the 9th District of New York State, running for the 2nd District in the U.S. Congress. Thank you, Mike.
Such a pleasure, Frank. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike LiPetri, for joining us today. I appreciate it. In closing, I'd like to make a commentary on a commentary, so to speak. I like to talk about, I was watching the news, I'm watching the allocations of all the money being sent out, sending money to universities like Harvard. Thank God they sent it back. Stanford, they sent it back. You know, these colleges and universities have endowments that are beyond our imagination. And talking about where the money's going, the small businesses. I think personally, speaking personally for myself, that I think I'm going to seek out mom and pop stores and give them my business, at least in the beginning moving forward. I think the larger corporations have gobbled up a lot of the money. I see that still mom and pops are struggling. I know personally my Walk with Frank is a not-for-profit organization. I don't take a salary. I've never taken a salary in 30 years. Uh, Everyone associated with Walk with Frank is a volunteer. So and so I'm not entitled to any of that money. But the mom and pops that are looking for the money, I think, are not getting it. I think those I've spoken with many people that have fallen through the cracks. They're not large corporations that can afford the people to fill out the paperwork, and I think they're struggling. So I think, personally speaking, moving forward, that myself, speaking for my household, we're going to seek out the mom and pop stores and restaurants and little shops, and I think that's where the hardest hit Americans, as far as business wise goes, the hardest hit Americans are struggling moving forward. So thank you for joining me today. I appreciate everyone tuning in, and as always, peace out from Walk with Frank.